Hey guys, Matt here, and it is springtime tool tune-up time. And today we're going to be talking about the Eastwood Throatless Shear. I've tried to make it a habit in my shop that every spring, as soon as it starts to get somewhat warm in March, I try to go through and clean the shop up really good, get rid of old junk that's laying around, and also tune up a lot of my tools that maybe I've noticed over the winter as I'm using them much harder in the winter. I will notice that some of the tools need a tune-up, replacing, fixing, whatever. So one of the things that I do pretty regularly, probably yearly, because I use it so hard, is the Eastwood Throatless Shear. So the Eastwood Throatless Shear is kind of one of my go-to cutting tools for sheet metal. You can cut curves with it, you can cut straight lines, and it is just honestly just like the quickest, easiest, handiest thing to just quickly cut a piece of scrap of metal or cut a patch panel or something, rough cut it. I use this thing all the time. So because of that, it does get kind of used and abused, and the blades on this do need either adjustment or replacement every so often. So I've covered in another video how to do an adjustment when you get one of these brand new out of the box. Now since then I have worn this blade out and I've tried adjusting it, but what's happening is when I make cuts, I'm actually getting cuts where the cut edge is curved and it's actually rolling the edge over and distorting the metal, and that's kind of your first sign that your blades might be going dull. So one quick way you can check that is to actually go over your blades or go over with another cut and kind of move your metal along as you go on the blades. So maybe if it's rolling the edge over and you have the metal kind of pushed all the way in the back like I like to do, if you try going all the way out to maybe the outermost edge, which is probably the part that doesn't get used nearly as much, and if it cuts a little better in those areas, that'll kind of tell you that your blade is probably dull towards the backside and it does need replacing. Of course you can try adjusting it to see if that'll help, but usually after a year or a couple of years you will have to replace these blades. It's just a consumable like anything. So what I'm going to show you here is how you can quickly replace these blades in a nice clean cut, and you're ready to roll for the next couple of years. Alright, so we're going to start working on tuning up and replacing our blades on the Throatless Shear here. So the first thing is, these are your two blades right here. There's a top and a bottom blade on this, and they're pretty easy to take out. There's not a lot that holds in. So there is a couple little flathead set screws here. These are actually for adjustment. You don't need to really touch them up front. The bottom blade is basically held in with this clamp that's right here on the front. And just take your Eastwood wrench, loosen that guy up, and that takes the clamp off, and when you loosen it off you can just slip it out like that. Now the bottom is held in with some Phillips head screws. You can see just the threads coming out the top here, but you actually have to come from the bottom here to take those out. You'll need a little stubby because obviously your longer screwdriver is going to run into the bottom of the tool. So take them out. Okay, so there we have our top blade off. You can see that it has a little bit of a curve to it, and it is different than the bottom blade. So you notice that they are different in thickness, but they both have a curvature to them. You can see, man, I definitely abused this one here. You can see where I've just run along there and chipped the edges and everything, and I'm sure that's not helping with the cutting edges on there. This side as well, I can see there's some chips and different things in there and irregularities in there. So I'm sure that's why we were having problems with the cutting on this, and it was rolling the edges, especially in the back. So those are done. Now we'll take our new ones here, and the new ones, what you want to do is actually, I'm going to go get some pre and spray these off. They have some covering, like a sealant on them, like a grease that's on them, so that they don't rust in transport. So we're going to spray them off, get them all clean, then we can put them on and show you how we can get everything all set up and cutting real sweet. Alright, so we got all the blades cleaned up and ready to install our brand new blades here. So just make sure when you're installing these, you have this edge that's beveled right here going down. So when we mount this up, make sure it is like that. You don't have it turned the other way, and it's just the square edge. So if you actually put it in and just feel, there is a curvature to each of these pieces that matches the blade, and you will definitely notice it will fit nice and snug in there. Now the other thing you want to make sure you're doing when you're ordering these is there's two different styles of these tools. So originally there was a version of this that was made for many years that did not have this little pin in it, and the blades are very slightly different between those with the pin and without. So when you're ordering, there is either option. You need to make sure you have that. I have the newest version with the lock pin in it for safety, so I ordered the appropriate blades. So we'll get our screws set in. Now these screws do not really have in the top here, they don't really have an adjustment in them. All your adjustments pretty much done on your bottom blade. So I'll get this set in here with these screws, and then we will get the top one in, bottom one in, and we'll show you how everything adjusts up. Alright, so now we're ready to install our bottom one. So unlike the top where you could see the bevel goes down like that, we're going to actually turn the bevel so it is facing down and you can't see it. So you might think that it would be like this for the cutting, but it actually, for it to cut, it's like this. It is actually like tapered so that everything will fit correctly. So slide it on your clamp, and what there's these two little set screws here. Those set screws, depending on how you have stuff set up, you may need to just turn them out so you can get your blade in. If you're really good and you've done this a few times, you can usually leave your screws just as is and not mess with them. So what we want to do is tighten our clamp down, but we do not want to go all the way tight because we want to check some other stuff first before we clamp this down and really lock it in. So the first thing we're going to check is the slop in our handle here. So there's a couple adjustment screws or adjustment bolts. And right back here at the pivot point, this is the most common one that just over time from opening and closing, this starts to work itself just a little loose over time. So that's just, take 11/16 here. And I will snug that up so get it working pretty good. But if you get too tight, you actually notice that you can pinch it to the point where it's like hard to move. So I like this to be a little easier to cut with. So I will we have all the play out down there, and now we just have some play up at the handle here. So this actually has same thing, just with instead of being threaded in the back side. So it has the same wrench on that side, it's slightly larger on the other, and you can just crank that just a little bit tighter, and there we've pretty much gotten all the slop out. Now this is the same thing here. This is like a pivot point, so you don't want to go crazy on how tight you make that, because it can actually just create more work when you're working it. So that's feeling pretty good. I'm going to go a tiny bit looser there. Alright, that feels pretty good. We've gotten all the slop out of there. The last little slop is just there's a bolt that holds your handle on here. And we can go ahead and tighten that up. And I took pretty much most of the slop out of this thing now, so it operates pretty smooth. So now that we have all the slop out, the reason we're doing that first is we want to set our blades after we take any of the loose sloppiness out of here by tightening those bolts up. It can happen over time. So we got that all taken care of. Now we can adjust our blades here, and then we will clamp it. So you can take these little set screws, use a just real fine flathead screw, and you could basically fit it in there. And if you look real closely, you can actually move this and it will push closer in to the point where it'll get it almost touching the blade up there. And down at the bottom, it should be pretty close to the same. Let's move that. There we go. So that feels just a little tight up there. It feels like it's binding a little bit. So So I just kind of get it close like this by feel, and then we'll put like a piece of paper in here or chipboard and see how it cuts before we put metal in to possibly damage the blades. Alright, so we got the pinch bolt tightened down here, and I have just some chipboard. So this chipboard is what I use for patterns. I like to set up, this is kind of our first test so you don't damage the blades, is the chipboard. So you put this in, this is probably just a little thicker. It's probably like the equivalent, I think, of like 16 gauge, roughly. And I will use that and see if it cuts. Now when these blades are nice and sharp, you should be able to just cut chipboard with it. So I actually like to keep mine kept fairly tight like this, so I don't feel any binding or anything. It feels like the blades are hitting, so we have enough kind of clearance there for that. That's not a problem. It looks like maybe a little bit, it might not be cutting 100% there. It might be, but it's hard to say with the paper. So now that I feel comfortable with that, we can take a piece of our sheet metal here. This is 20 gauge. And we can put that in. We'll do a cut. I'm just going to pull straight through and see what it looks like. So we can see here that this piece, real nice straight cut here, but at the very end, towards the back of the blade, closest to me, or front of the blade, depending on how you look at it, it started curling the metal down just a little bit. So that tells me that my gap is just a little too fat for this 20 gauge in the front there. So depending on your preferences, some people like to leave it like that. That's the nice thing with these. You can leave it a little fat at the end here, and you can cut thicker gauge metal with a wider gap there, and it's okay as long as you remember that, and then you can do the thinner stuff towards the back. But I'm going to go ahead and loosen this up. I like to keep mine tight throughout the whole way, and then just adjust if I'm doing something thicker like 16 gauge. So we'll take that, and we're going to just turn this in like one turn. Test our clearance here. That looks pretty good. Tighten our pinch bolt down. Good. Now we'll test our piece here. Alright, much better. I have just a little tiny bit of curve at the end there, but I think that was just me, how I repositioned it. But throughout pretty much the whole cut, or 90% of it, it's really good. So if I want to get really picky, I could adjust it a little bit tighter, but I'm pretty okay with that. It's not curling the edge over the whole way. It's making a nice even cut, and with very little effort, I'm able to cut the sheet metal. So that's all dialed in now. Now the last thing we'll do is just take some grease or oil. We'll throw it in here on these gears, and then we should be good to go. Alright, so after doing that test cut on a curved piece, man, the thing cuts sweet, and I can't believe I lived this long through winter with this thing having dull blades. It was just kind of a pain to use it, and you just get used to it over time. So that's why it's great to kind of every spring or periodically do a check of all your tools and tune everything up as you need it. So now that everything's good, what I like to do is then take some either penetrating oil or cutting oil or something, and I'll put it on a rag here, and I will just wipe my blades down and just leave a dusting of this penetrating oil or cutting fluid right on your blades so that they don't flash rust over time, and also leaves them lubricated so that they'll make nice clean cuts and it will extend the life of your blades. So now that I have this all set up, it is good to go, and this will probably last me a year or two of very, very heavy use. I use this thing almost every day. So if you only use this occasionally, maybe a couple times a year, you may only have to do this maybe once in your lifetime. But now that you've seen the process, you know how to properly remove them, install them, and set them up to get a really nice precision cut with your Eastwood Throatless Shear. If you want to learn more about the Eastwood Throatless Shear or get yourself a set of blades, you can click the link down below, or you can visit eastwood.com to get all the tools you need to do the job right. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.